the way you're measuring your carbon footprint as a company, well, there's different ways to do it, and therefore there's different ways to reach these targets. And the reason comes from the fact that when we take all the emissions from the generators in the system, there are multiple ways to take these emissions and allocate them to the consumers. So the first methodology that exists, which I think is one of the most intuitive ones, is the location-based. So the location-based basically says that as a consumer, I cannot choose the origin of my electricity as it irreversibly mixes as it gets injected into the grid. Another way to say that is that we can't selectively decide to send wind electricity through a specific power line to a specific consumer. And so it has a couple of consequences to think that way. It means that the thing you can do as a consumer to lower your footprint is to consume electricity at times where the grid is greener. For example, at times the wind is blowing, the sun is shining. So it incentivizes flexibility of the consumer who wants to reduce its location-based footprint. It incentivizes optimal sitting. So a data center, it's probably more interesting to position it in a place where the electricity is greener than a place where it's not, because the flexibility will only take you so far. A couple of hurdles or problems that arise with this incentive mechanism is that there's no way to fund capacity investments or storage investments. When I talk about capacity investment, I'm specifically talking about funding, for example, the deployment of more wind or solar. There's just no instrument that allows you to do this because there's no certificate that you can buy that is eligible in this methodology, because again, you can't choose the origin of your electricity. However, the last point is that it's a credible traceability instrument in the sense that if you go to people in the street and you ask them, where does your electricity come from? And does it differ from the one that your neighbor is getting? Probably they will intuitively say that both electricity, mine and the one that goes to my neighbor, are the same. So in that sense, there's a credibility piece to the traceability of it. Now, really I think the biggest problem we have with this incentive is that it doesn't really allow a corporate consumer to fund the energy transition by expressing their preference. And this is why we have this second column here, which is called the market-based on a yearly level, which means that you can take your total consumption as a consumer on a yearly level, and then you can buy guarantees of origin or renewable energy certificates in the US in order to cover that consumption with renewable electricity. And the advantage here is that it is a way to fund new projects with the caveat that the certificate needs to be what we call additional. So I'm not going to go into the details here, but it basically means that the action of you buying a certificate needs to be meaningful enough that it will actually incentivize the project to be built. And often that's related to the price of the certificate. It needs to create a revenue stream that is significant enough to drive a proper price signal to the project builder. The issue with this scheme is that it doesn't incentivize flexibility, because why would you even think about shifting the location or the time at which you're consuming electricity if in the end you can just cover it with certificates at the end of the year? And that is the main key. The other piece is that the only projects that are eligible in terms of funding are more renewables. And instead, maybe what we need is more storage systems or more interconnectors in some of the places that are challenged. And the last challenge we have here is that it is not a credible traceability instrument, i.e. a consumer won't really intuitively understand that their electricity during the night can be coming from solar electricity because you simply bought a certificate. So you have this new paradigm coming up, which is called 24/7, which is the same as it basically tries to take the best of both worlds. And it is a way to procure electricity through granular guarantees of origin at an hourly level that also require the electricity to be physically deliverable. So this physical deliverability means that the consumption needs to happen at the same time as the generation. And it also needs to be physically deliverable, which means that the grid should be uncongested between the point of production and the point of consumption. And you see suddenly that there's a lot of things that are incentivized. Flexibility is incentivized because you are better off at using electricity at a time where the grid is cleaner, because then you won't have to buy certificates on top of that. Optimal sitting of projects as well, because the location at which you consume electricity matters. It will fund the capacity projects, but it will also fund storage and other grid projects, because there is an incentive to buy certificates, or there's an incentive to build storage systems if you can buy certificates at a time where the grid is clean and then resell them at a time where the grid is dirty. So storage is also incentivized here, and it is a more credible traceability instrument. It becomes closer to the location-based. So the reason why this becomes interesting is that there suddenly is an alignment of incentives between the corporate sustainability targets and the electricity prices. So this graph is a bit small on the top right-hand side, but on the horizontal axis, you see the penetration of wind and solar on a percentage of annual consumption. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you see the correlation between price and CO2. And you see a general trend that the more there's wind and sun on the system, the alignment between price and CO2 becomes much better. And this means that suddenly there's a way for companies to be able to reach their targets and reduce their footprint at the same time. So electricity procurement also now funds more relevant projects. It's not only more wind and solar, it's also storage, flexibility projects. It's more technology inclusive. The last piece of it is also that suddenly flexibility is incentivized by the footprint reduction of different products. So if you think about what Tesla is doing, Tesla has a footprint in scope 3 related to the electricity that their consumers are using. And that suddenly creates an incentive for Tesla to create a product where smart charging is included. It will reduce the consumer's footprint, but it will also reduce Tesla's footprint. And the final piece is that it incentivizes government to green their grid, because you'd like to optimally put your data center in a place where the grid will be cleaner in the future.